Hi, everyone, and welcome to today's session. I need to say that it's a little bit different than what I originally envisioned when Dr. Grace approached me over a year ago. I was so looking forward to coming to Mississippi, to spending time with favorite friends in Winona and Hattiesburg and Jackson, and really connecting with the state of Mississippi in a variety of ways, to seeing all of you. And as we all know, today that's not possible. And so as part of this presentation, one of the things that I wanted to do was to think really carefully about what was most important to pay attention to. And so I did that, and I have made some changes in how I would ordinarily start a presentation. And part of what I want to say is that today my goal is still that you will be engaged, that you will really take away resources from this presentation. But I also hope that today will be an opportunity for you to participate comfortably. And one of the things that I know is that many of you are juggling more balls than you ever thought was possible to get in the air, were possible to get in the air, pardon me, that you are working multiple jobs, that you may actually, before you came to this session today, have set children up to be doing on-screen learning, and that you are listening on a daily basis to families who are struggling. And so with that in mind, I decided to do something very different as the start to today's presentation. And so what I invite you to do is to really just put anything that you have in your hands down, whether it's a mug of coffee or your iPhone or the paper that you were grading. Stop and just put everything down, put both feet on the floor, get as comfortable as you can. And some of you are watching from the edge of a bed in the only quiet room in the house, and others are if you're at desks. But if you would, I'd like to invite you to participate in an activity that I hope will be a meaningful way to start our time together today. I encourage you to participate however you are comfortable. And with that, I'm going to start this brief video and ask you to enjoy it.
So we're going to finish off tonight with just a bit of a grounding technique. This is called the butterfly hug. You can do it with crossing your thumbs and hands in front of you and alternating here. If it's more comfortable to just tap on the shoulders, you're welcome to do that. And if that's not quite comfortable, feel free to go ahead and put your hands on your knees or on your legs, and you can tap gently to yourself there. This is a wonderful, wonderful grounding technique because you can take this anywhere. And so whether it be at the office to help just bring down that intensity of emotion for a moment, whether it be at home, whether it be before bed, and this is really, really beneficial, and whenever you need to get that emotion down a bit. So for those who'd like, you're welcome to join me. If it's more comfortable just to watch me, you're welcome to. You can also close your eyes, and so whatever's going to be best and most comfortable for you. So let's go and get started. And let's go and get started by just finding where it's most comfortable for us. Just kind of experiment. Does this feel good here? Does this feel good here, or on your knees? So take a moment to find that. When you find that place, let's go and get started with just a deep breath in. So taking a deep breath in. When you reach the top, hold for just a moment. And then exhaling. Just let it come out, just natural as can be. And then just slowly start tapping. Just alternating sides, alternating the taps, knowing that whatever you choose is A-okay. If you'd like, you're also welcome to add a positive affirmation to this. It may be I am loved. It could be I can do this. It may be I am in a secure and safe place. Whatever seems to fit for what your need is right now. Feel free to just add that in and just repeat it to yourself in your head. And just remembering to keep tapping for as long as it's comfortable. If you need to go a little harder, You're welcome to if it needs to be gentle. Again, just experimenting and see what fits for you right now. And you're welcome to do that. And go as short or as long as till you feel just a little bit calmer or until you feel that that's good enough for today. So again, just breathing in and out and just tapping. Tapping for as long as you'd like. And then, whenever you're ready, when you've hit that spot that feels a-okay or good enough, go ahead and just pause there for a moment. Just letting your hands rest, letting your body rest. And if you'd like, feel free to take one more deep breath in, holding for just a moment, and then when you're ready, exhaling, just letting the air flow out all natural and just whatever comes. That's a butterfly hug. Thanks, everyone.
I am in a very unusual position. I can't see you. I can't hear you. Would you, though, take a minute and share any reactions that you have to this video in the chat box? And if any of you are willing to be this generous, if you would also share any thoughts about who you might like to share this video with. And if you would do that now, I would be most appreciative. I'm feeling a little isolated here. So thanks, Amy, for chiming in, and to all of the rest of you who are sharing those messages. I very, very much appreciate it. This is an odd way to interact with a group. And Angel, thank you. It's already, our faculty are thinking about what courses they might use a resource like this in. Thanks. I love the idea of sharing this with your own children. And what would it be like to have a conversation with them about what a wonder they are, the many ways in which they're wonderful. So thank you. I appreciate that. And it's helpful to me. I'd like to transition now to thinking a little bit about how it is that we support the shift from thinking about all children to each and every child. There's a wonderful and powerful video that's on Netflix right now that's called Crip Camp. And it's a story about a summer camp for children with disabilities. And many of them are children who had physical disabilities, some intellectual disabilities. But what happened at this camp when these children got together is they just built a sense of empowerment and leadership and strength. And from their shared experiences came just phenomenal human resources, one of whom was an assistant secretary within the US Department of Education named Judy Heumann. One of the things that Judy Heumann used to say was that until all means all, we really have to be more explicit. We have to remind everyone that we need to focus on making sure that we're supporting each and every child and each and every family. And I'd like to share that the emphasis on that has increased recently for several reasons. And one of the reasons is that a very important body of work called Transforming the Workforce for Children Birth Through Age 8 was published, sharing information about what could be discerned from research about our process of building early childhood systems that would support each and every child. And two kinds of discoveries were made. One was that we need to really do a much more effective job at being explicit about particularly supporting children who've experienced trauma, children who are dual language learners, children who have difficult life circumstances, that we really need to be explicit in incorporating an emphasis on cognitive and social and science and math skills so that we have learners who really are ready for the next round of exciting jobs that they will rise to take. And the other discovery was huge because in looking to see how in the United States the early childhood system was faring, the big discovery was that there isn't a system, and that in every single state, in fact, what there is a non-system, that there are very different expectations, very different professional development, very different compensation for each of the silos of early childhood, from family childcare to Head Start to pre-K to faith-based programs. And those were two huge discoveries. And thank you, by the way, for your continued comments. I'm still reading them. I'm multitasking here, and it's quite a joy. So what happened as a result of these two big announcements were several things. One is that an organization that I'm sure many of you are part of is the National Association for the Education of Young Children. And they pulled together national organizations working on behalf of children and families. And together they crafted this audacious vision, which in many ways is completely aligned with the video that you just saw, that each and every child, beginning at birth, has the opportunity to benefit from high quality early childhood education delivered by an effective, diverse, well-prepared, and well-compensated workforce. What an amazing vision that is. And what they then set out to do was to identify what it would take to achieve that vision. Now, for those of you who are not familiar with the resource I mentioned previously, the Transforming the Workforce, or the Power to the Profession initiative, again, all of these are things that are on your handout with links to learning more about these resources. So with, again, leadership from NAEYC, one of the things that was developed is a framework for unifying the early childhood profession. And one of the ideas that they put forward is, what would it be like if there were a single set of standards and competencies that informed what it is that people who work with young children need to know and be able to do? What would it be like if there were expectations for ongoing professional development in Head Start that matched the expectations in pre-K and in childcare? And in fact, the unifying framework has been developed, and those standards and competencies have been established now. And a number of states are really looking at how they can use the same framework to build cohesion across all of their systems. If you are not familiar with this work, it's pretty wonderful, but some of the things that it absolutely underscores consistently is the need for greater emphasis on equity, greater emphasis on diversity, on race, and on culture, and really supporting the full participation of each and every child. Specifically with regard to the priority for increasing the emphasis on diversity and how we're preparing teachers, is a new study that has just come out. Some pretty interesting findings. In this study, one of the things that was shared is that when there is an emphasis on early childhood preparation, and that preparation can include higher education programs, it also can include ongoing professional development. But when there is a concerted, consistent emphasis on diversity, that teachers in early childhood positions are retained in the field longer. So one of the things we're starting to see is when we actualize this idea of preparing early childhood educators to support each and every child, we really grow the longevity of talented individuals in our field. And I think that's a tremendously important finding. What I'd like to do next is to share with you 4 different definitions. I've organized ideas for this presentation into 4 buckets, if you will. And one of the ideas has to do with culturally responsive teaching. And what does that mean? Because I think for a lot of people, when they think about culturally responsive teaching, they think about, oh gosh, that means I am effective in supporting children who come from another country, or have family members from another country. And I think we're really growing in our understanding of what culturally responsive means. And the definition from a resource that's called Culturally Responsive Teaching, that's part of your handout, is listed here, and I'd like you to think about this. Asset-based approaches as alternatives to popular deficit-oriented teaching methods, which position the languages, cultures, and identities of students as barriers to learning. How is it that we flip what some believe are the barriers to children being successful? The fact that they speak a different home language, the fact that they are racially or ethnically different. How do we flip that to seeing the assets each child brings and building on those assets? I have one idea that I'd like to share with you. I forgot to mention this. One of my favorite kinds of resources in the early childhood field, when I'm doing professional development, when I'm teaching, is what I call gumdrops. And gumdrops to me are short, really powerful and impactful videos that are good, readily available, and free. I have no budget for resources. I don't know about the rest of you, but I love finding good, readily available, free resources. To the concept of asset-based teaching, I'd like to show you a video next that's called The Gift. And again, if you would be kind enough to share any of your reactions to this video.
You guys go ahead and find a station to play in.
¿Oíste? Que vas a jugar en la escuela hoy.
Good morning, Diana.
Good morning, Miss Bethany. How are you?
Wonderful. Good morning, Valentina. How are you? Go ahead and put your step away, okay? How was your vacation? Valentina, you don't need that right now. We're getting ready to learn. Please go put it on the shelf.
You think I don't need my gift, but I really do. Me siento perdida when you take it away.
Good morning, Angela. How are you?
Good.
Good. It's great to see you. Go ahead and put your backpack over there, okay? Here's an owl and a frog and a mouse.
Every morning, we bring our gift to school. The gift of our first language.
Why do you think the animals go to school at night? Zoe.
They're nocturnal. They don't go to sleep at night.
Okay. Valentina, what do you think? Valentina?
Every morning, you take our gift away. You think it will get in the way of our learning.
¿Y por qué? ¿Porque son animales nocturnos?
Porque en la día están durmiendo y en la noche están despiertos. When you only look at what we can't do yet in English, you miss all the things you know and can do. Why won't you let us use our first language to make sense of all the new things you teach us?
Oh, Angela, don't take your shoes off. We don't take our shoes off here.
My culture and my language go together. They're part of who I am. Learning is easier when you accept all of me.
Okay, everybody, listen up. I want you to sort your bears into small and large, okay? Valentina. Small and large. Small and large. Pequeño, small. Grande, large.
Pequeño, small, grande, large.
So today, we are going to greet our friends in their own special language. And guess what? When we come inside from the playground, we're going to take our shoes off, just like Angela does when she's at home. Okay? You ready to sing? Okay, let's start. Ready? Mingla ba Angela. Angela is our
When you use words and songs in our first language and connect them with English, our learning takes off. Our families can help, and you can remind them they help us best when they keep talking, singing, and reading with us in our first language.
Yo tengo unos animales nocturnos.
You may think our English-speaking friends know more than we do, but our bilingual brains are amazing. They think in 2 languages and give us the power to express ourselves on both of them. It's not confusing at all.
large familiar fingers into a fan. Next, he leaned forward and kissed the center of her hand. Now, Chester didn't want his mother to be
Worried.
That's right, worried. And in Spanish we say preocupado.
My first language is my gift. It helps me grow and shine. I know you want that for me, for all of us, now and in the future.
Ginebug Bye كفتفتين Heart of Lema أفتحوا هديتي
Abre mi regalo and watch me change the world.
So that's a gumdrop. Thanks, Mary, for your comment on that. The second definition that I wanted to share, is one that is very dear to any of you who are part of NAYC. You know that in 2019, a position statement on equity is something that they developed as a way to really express the importance of equity in all NAEYC efforts. And so part of what you see here is the definition of equity, the state that would be achieved if individuals fared the same in society, regardless of race, gender, class, disability, or other social or cultural characteristic. And it I apologize for reading to you, but I think they took a very bold step in thinking about the many ways in which equity can apply, the many lenses that equity includes. And the gumdrop, just to illustrate that sometimes gumdrops are lighthearted and sometimes gumdrops are serious. I'm going to show you a serious gumdrop because part of what it underscores is how much work we have to do in this area. And a lot of it has to do with assumptions that we make about others. As you're watching this next video, which is called The Look, we had the gift, now the look, I'd love for you to think about whether or not you have ever given someone else the look or gotten the look from someone else. So here we go. Sorry. So, who gets the look? Do people who are different than we get the look? Do people with disabilities get the look? And what does this have to say about how we support children in embracing differences? And how do we help them develop that vocabulary? How do we help them to see capability and positive attributes in others? And we'll talk more about that in a few minutes. This is just kind of the definitions and introductory section. So the third definition that I want to make sure that we look at is family engagement. And family engagement is something that is defined both in federal language and in that definition, which you see in the resources listed in your handout. Part of what it includes is not exclusively parents, not exclusively grandparents, but really uses a broad definition of the caring adults in the life of an individual child. And I think part of what this underscores is how much the language of all of our resources, all of our documents needs to reflect that. Because parent is a wonderful word, but it's a subset of the many words that can be used to describe who is part of a family. I think particularly as we are using virtual mechanisms to interact with the members of our family we cannot connect to now, I think different ways to share what's important, to value how the contributions each family member can make are stronger than ever. And so I now want to share with you a lighthearted gumdrop, a very short gumdrop. Again, this is also on your handout. You'll be able to get all of these to use in your own work. But this is a gumdrop that shows what it can be like when we engage different family members in part of the process of supporting each and every child.
Fellas, have a good weekend.
Fix my tractor's water pump with baling wire and chewing gum.
That's how you do it.
I reeled in a trophy fish.
Taught that fish a lesson. Well, I built my granddaughter's brain. I reinforced positive neural pathways and built a foundation for good emotional, social, and cognitive function.
How do I build a brain?
Peekaboo works good.
So you just saw a different kind of gumdrop. Again, just think about who would you share this with?
Fellas, have a good weekend.
Actually, and here's a question for you. If you think about peekaboo, one of the things that's miraculous about peekaboo is that too many people don't understand what cognitive skill is being built every time you remove the blanket, the diaper, the whatever you're hiding behind, and you're still there. And that notion of object permanence is something that we really need to reward the people who are playing peekaboo a million times, whether it's over Skype or over just any other mechanism, because they are building brains. So last but not least, I wanted to share a definition of inclusion. And this is actually the middle sentence of a 3-sentence definition. And I am very proud to say that I was part of the process through which this definition was developed. There was a joint effort by the NAEYC and the Division for Early Childhood, which is the largest organization working on behalf of young children with or at risk for disabilities. And families from both organizations, faculty from both organizations, teachers from both organizations contributed to this process. And I wanted to make sure that you saw this middle segment of the definition because it's tremendously important as we think about what does quality inclusion really mean. It says the desired results of inclusive experiences for children with and without disabilities and their families include a sense of belonging and membership, positive social relationships, and friendships to develop and learning, to support development and learning to their full potential. So here's what happened. When this draft definition went out to this network of colleagues, and actually it was a national request for input to early childhood colleagues and early childhood special education colleagues. This was in late 2008. And there was a platform created where everyone could come and share what they thought. This sentence, when it went out for national input, read, "The desired results of inclusive experiences for children with disabilities in their families include da 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 da." And what we got back from both early childhood special education colleagues and early childhood colleagues was, sure, we want this for children with disabilities, but guess what? I want this for my child just as much. If we could achieve this for each and every child, think what would happen to bullying. But part of what this also needs to serve is as a reminder that quality inclusion means that what's going on in that setting is as effective for the child with a disability as it is for his or her peers. And I think we also need to always remember that we tend to think about inclusion as something that happens in a learning setting, that it also happens within families, that it also happens within neighborhoods and communities. And to underscore that point, the final gumdrop that I'm going to show you, but not the last video, the final gumdrop that I'm going to show you is the next one. And again, watch and see what you think.
Hey. Hey.
I pick up a broken comb, run it through my thin gray hair. Though I don't have any plans tonight, I'm not going anywhere. Well, I should have seen this coming.
Come on.
Don't know why I'm surprised.
When the best of us steps up, our nation stands a little taller. We all play for Canada.
So there's your final gumdrop. I'm hoping that, or actually, we're about to take a 5-minute break. It is 5 minutes on my clock, 5 minutes to 11 your time, 12 my time. And I'd like to just ask you to, for the next 5 minutes, just do something that will allow you to return at 11 o'clock straight up and be more relaxed, more centered, more available. So that may be get a fresh cup of coffee. It may be just close your eyes, whatever will make you ready to learn. If you would please do that for the next 5 minutes. It would be great if you moved a little bit because we sit so much as we look at these screens. And while you're doing that, I am going to see if I can persuade my colleagues in Mississippi to type into the chat box the URL that's on the handout. Actually, I think I can probably do it. I can capture it. But I'm going to try to give you in the chat box the URL for where all the resources, including the handout, are posted so that everybody will have that. All right, take your 5 minutes. We'll come back and pick up where we left off. Thanks, everybody. I'll see you in a few.
Camille, I'm going to make a quick statement here. Please, when you come back, if you would, please make sure that you've signed in with your name, first name, last name, and email in the chat box so we can count you as being present. Thank you.
Great job, Camille. It's all beautiful.
Thanks, everyone. It's really helpful. I mean, this is hard to do, believe it or not, with no feedback. So I am so appreciative of the feedback that you're giving me in the chat box. It really makes a big difference.
I know. It's hard. I know it's hard.
Jay? Oops. Let's get this right. No, thanks. Hi, everyone. So in a few minutes, my nearly perfect husband is going to come in and bring me some hot tea because, as you can tell, my voice is a little raspy today. I do not know why, and I apologize for my poor vocal quality. If my friend Jan Schuck were on the line, she would probably scold me for not taking care of my voice. And for those of you who are here today from Winona, if you see her, please send her my love. All right, so we are now back. I'm guessing that everyone has returned from taking a brief respite, and I'm going to see if I can adjust this little portable video camera so that you can see the top of my head and I don't feel like such a, I don't know how this is going to work. All right, there we go. So what I'd like to do is to share some examples of resources that you can use. And again, I'm going to focus on things that are free, readily available, and good. Things that you can use to consider enhancing your practices in each of the areas that we just talked about. So before we do anything else, we're going to start with culturally responsive teaching. And one of the things that I would like to share with you is a brief clip from a video that's called Diversity, Contrasting Perspectives. Because one of the things I think we often don't credit or acknowledge is that culture informs every single thing we do. So I'm going to ask you to watch this clip. Take a look at 3 different ideas about the best way to feed a young child.
Take a look now at some contrasting approaches to feeding, toileting, learning, and sleeping. This mother is leaving her son free to explore the food to his heart's content, allowing him to have a sensory experience along with his meal. Just notice how many of his 5 senses are being stimulated in this scene. In addition to taste, smell, and sight, the lack of clothes gives maximum tactile experience, and the opera music adds an auditory element.
I see. This one is coming out in the ear. Okay. Maybe Daddy has a...
He's certainly enjoying himself. So is his father. He's eating his meal, having a sensory experience, and developing independence all at the same time. This family also believes in independence. The children aren't getting so messy because they've learned to use utensils, but they still use fingers when necessary. This mother believes that eating efficiently and neatly is more important than having a sensory experience or eating independently. Waste and cleanup are factors in this mother's decision to feed her child. She not only feeds her 2-year-old, but also her 4-year-old.
So I'm willing to bet that some of you may have had a strong reaction to one of those ideas about the best way to feed a child. But I share this with you to underscore that each of us comes to each interaction with each child and each family with ideas about the best way that's shaped by our personal culture and life experiences. And just as a way to give you a few illustrations of what that might include, I'm going to explore a little bit more about what we mean by culturally responsive teaching. So the components of culturally responsive teaching are so much more complex and varied than is this a child from a different country? Does this child speak a different language? Is their skin a different color than mine? That truly we need to instead think about all the different ways in which culture impacts everything that we do with children and families. The document that you see on the left called Culturally Responsive Teaching is a wonderful resource that has laid out 8 competencies that are necessary for culturally responsive teaching. There's a wonderful research-based description of the benefits to children and families when we use culturally responsive practices. There's also a section that talks about the harm that can come to children and families when we don't. And then for each section, each of these 8 competencies, there are ideas about how to implement them. I'm going to just take a couple. I'd like you to look, for example, at the idea of reflecting on one's cultural lens, and just take a look and think about that, and think about maybe just your own personal culture, and think about, do you prefer a quiet classroom to a noisy classroom? Do you always look both ways before you cross the street? I cannot. I still do, absolutely. And I can hear my, just my 3-year-old self getting the instruction to do that. Do you know the story of how you got your name? Do you monitor value judgments as you interact with families about the decisions that they have made, if their priorities are different than yours? Do you prefer to work individually or as a member of a team? These are all manifestations of our personal culture. And one idea that I'd like to offer to you as a way of thinking about this is an illustration that's called the iceberg concept of culture. And it reminds us that the visible aspects of culture, just the food and the songs and sombreros, are not where the essence of culture really rests. That our ideas about whether or not touching is appropriate, and boy, hasn't that changed, about the use of gestures, about what is considered an appropriate way to comfort a child. All of these are culturally developed ideas, and the more we think about them, the more important it is. If you'd like to try something that would be really interesting as an activity, think about one aspect of your personal culture that others can't see. And think perhaps about a time where you had an interaction in which it became completely clear to you that how someone views an issue or how someone might decide is completely different than the way that you would. For those of you who really like the idea of exploring this, one of the resources that I've given you is a connection to a brief, I think it's 10 or 12 minutes long, and it's ways to think about the identity iceberg and how we use it. For some of you, it would be how do we use it with our college students. For others of you, it might be how do we use this to build an understanding of personal culture with children, with families. But it's a completely self-contained little unit of information that you might enjoy. I also wanted to mention to you that the first document that I showed, the culturally responsive teaching document, has a set of questions for reflection, for consideration, for just pondering that relate to each of the 8 competencies. And so, with regard to our understanding of our own personal culture, the biases that each of us bring, there are questions like, how does my identity shape my thinking, my values, my view of the world? And also thinking back to your personal cultural journey. When did you become aware of your membership in particular groups that might have been different than others? And I think these are just some of the examples that can come from one of the free resources that I shared. The other thing that I want to tell you is throughout your handout, you will see sets of resources. And one of the things that I've collected and I'm sharing with you are compilations of free annotated resources Some of them are evidence sources, some are print sources, articles, chapters, things like that. Some of them are audio-visual, and some of them are online sites. So for this section, there is also, for those of you who want access to the whole fire hydrant of resources, there's actually a full collection that you can access that will give you many more ideas than the few that I just shared. The second definition that we took a look at, the second idea that we explored, has to do with the sense of equity, and how is it that we increase our capacity to make sure that our interactions with each child and with each family are in fact equitable. And that's different, as I'm sure you all recognize, from equal. Equal means every child gets the same. And it kind of is like, you know, some people have used the analogy of bowling. And if we consider all the children that we interact with and support to be the pins, equal would be, you know, if we rolled the ball down the lane. You can tell I'm not a very good bowler. What we would typically hit are all the pins in the middle. And what that means is, you know, those would be kind of the middle of the road, one size fits all approach to supporting children. And what it leaves are the outside pins. And I'm sure each and every one of you has had the experience, if you've ever bowled, of throwing a ball and seeing that those two outside pins are the ones that are left. And in many ways, those outside pins are the children who learn differently. And some of them may learn differently in ways that are slower or more complicated. And some of them may learn differently in ways that are faster and more complicated. But truly, if we think about how we can support each and every child, our capacity to achieve each child's full potential will grow dramatically. So with regard to equitable practices, I want to share a couple things with you. And some of you will remember that I shared the definition of equity that came from NAEYC's position statement, which is called Advancing Equity in Early Childhood Education. And NAEYC did something that was absolutely brilliant. Usually when a national organization has a new position statement, they send it out electronically, or they say, it's here, come look at it. What NAEYC did instead was to create the web page that you see in front of you right now, which I call a landing pad. To me, a landing pad is a place that you go to land and look around excuse me, please, for options for different kinds of resources. So some of the things that you'll find when you go to the landing pad on the NAEYC position statement are listed here. This is actually a screenshot from the website. And what you'll see are recommendations for everyone. What should everyone be doing to achieve more equitable opportunities for each and every child? But there's also, what is it that administrators can and should be doing? And you'll notice that administrators in different settings. How is it that policies can impact equity? Policies for hiring, policies for supporting. How is it that faculty and other professional development providers can factor equity into the work that they're doing? And then there's also this section that's called recommendations for early childhood educators. That's this, you'll notice that, excuse me, please, right near the top. I want to share something for your consideration. And this is a resource that's also posted on your website, that website where the handout is also posted. One of the things that you might consider doing is reflecting on how you interact with children and families. So I took the first 10 recommendations for early childhood educators, and I turned them into the reflection tool that you see in front of you. And again, this tool is posted. And what this invites you to think about are the ways in which you are already responsive to the recommendations. For example, do you know already how to recognize each and every child's unique strengths and support the inclusion of all children, given differences in culture, family structure, language, racial identity, gender, abilities, and economic class? And you may say, I do that, but we're not going to let you off that easily. what we're going to ask you to do as part of using this reflection tool is to say, okay, well, fine. How do you do that? What are ways in which you really accomplish that as part of your ongoing work? And if that's not an area that you currently are addressing in your work, there's an opportunity to consider how you might start to build those practices into your repertoire. For faculty members, I think you can see how this might be a great tool for students to reflect on. I can share, if you're interested, several ways in which faculty are already using this. It's a very simple tool, but it might be something as part of ongoing continuous quality improvement that you would say, I'm going to pick one area and strive to make my practices more equitable. Here are some resources that might help you in doing that. So there's a new publication out that's called Start with Equity, From the Early Years to the Early Grades. And it is one of the resources that's listed in your handout. It's a very current, very well-researched and thoughtful publication. And one of the things that it does is to highlight 3 groups of children who are most likely to receive inequitable treatment as part of their early childhood experiences. The first group is young children of color who particularly experience harsh discipline and its disproportionate application. I think you have seen in the data related to suspension and expulsion how that plays out. The second group is children with disabilities and the lack of opportunities for those children to be fully included. And the third group is children who are dual language learners. So the organization of today's session is not an accident. It actually is designed to help you discover resources in each of those 3 areas. So let me start with a very particular group, and that is, what is it that we can do to promote opportunities to increase equitable practices for young Black children? And I will share with you just a couple examples for your consideration, along with additional ideas that you can pursue. So one idea is to access an amazing resource written by Ioma Aruka and Sarah McJames on the characteristics. It's called Delivering on the Promise of Effective Early Childhood Education. It is specifically looking at how to support the equitable inclusion of young Black children. Look at the characteristics of inclusive and affirming learning environments. Collaborative relationships with families, and we already talked about family engagement. Connections to home language, traditions, and living experiences. Fun and engaging learning that incorporate racial and ethnic heritage with caring and community type environments. Interactions that build on positive identities, high expectations, and fair, non-judgmental, disciplinary practices. Let's take a look at what that might mean. So Marian Wright Edelman wrote an article several years ago. As we think about the priority that you just heard for environments that are equitable in how they reflect young Black children, her article was called "It's Hard to Be What You Can't See." And it chronicled the difference it makes when children don't see themselves in the stories, in the images, in the examples that we use. Let me give you the example of Winston. Winston is 2, and Winston is the son of a friend of mine. And she's an incredibly talented woman, currently in a doctoral program, teaching in an early childhood program at a community college, an amazing, amazing parent. And part of what she shared is that as Winston is getting more and more interested in books, she was noticing the difference in the amount of attention, the duration of attention, and the questions he asked, the verbal interactions, when the stories that she was reading to him had Black characters. And she said it was striking how different his interactions were when the stories were stories in which he saw himself. So how is it that we support all the Winstons who are part of our settings? And how do we keep in mind that when children do not see themselves represented, it can harm their sense of self-concept and their sense of belonging? For a number of the slides where I have shared different research facts, the original source is in the notes section of the PowerPoint slide. The Favazza article from which this came is listed in the notes. The other thing that's really interesting about children not seeing themselves in the materials and resources that we use is that the other children notice that. And so not only do children not see themselves, but other children notice who is important and who isn't. Let me give you another example that we absolutely need to focus on the potential of each child instead of the factors that might put that child at risk. And let me see if I can give you the example of Ronald. So Ronald is this amazing guy. He also is a child I really know. I create, with permission from families, what I call personas, which I find to be really useful stories for promoting learning. Ronald is a child who lives in North Carolina. Family is so committed. They're completely engaged in and support his early childhood education. This is a family that can really trace their roots back several generations to the era of slavery in the South. They make decisions collaboratively, and the way they share family history and values and morals and lessons is verbally. That stories are a huge part of how they pass information, how they connect with each other. So here's Ronald. He is just a whiz at science. When when any of the questions are about science, about animals, about planets, about dinosaurs, his is the first hand up. He loves that. But then there's this thing called reading in his preschool program, and that means the teacher sits in front of the room with a book and reads to the children. And Ronald thinks that reading is the most boring thing he's ever encountered. And I think one of the things we want never to allow is a child to not get engaged in the process of reading. It's just so essential to learning. So what this makes us think about is, what are some of the other factors that we might consider in making literacy and this very preliminary introduction to literacy more meaningful for Ronald? And here's one resource. This resource is part of your handout. So there's been a study, there have been several studies actually here in North Carolina at the Frank Porter Graham Child Development Institute, in which they've discovered that there is a particular practice that is extraordinarily effective in supporting young Black boys to advance their literacy skills. It's great for Black girls. It's great for any other child. But it's particularly effective with young Black boys. And the practice is oral storytelling, retelling stories, tapping into those historical traditions of families who were not allowed to learn to read and who built an oral tradition instead. So this is just a great example for me of how important it is to really have an equity lens in thinking about how are we going to support Ronald to be a reader. And so there's an example for you. I think the other kind of resource I want to make sure that you know about links to what I mentioned earlier with regard to the likelihood of young Black children experiencing severe punishment, suspension, and expulsion. And just want to make sure that you are aware of a phenomenal resource on this topic in the form of Rosemarie Allen. Her TED Talk called suspension is, oh darn it, school suspensions are an adult behavior, is fabulous. You will get to hear the entire chronology of how many times she was suspended as a child, along with suggestions for how to really create more equitable opportunities for rules to be implemented and reinforced. There also are a couple articles that I have found particularly helpful in looking at ways to incorporate consideration of young Black boys in different early educational settings. And those 2 articles are listed here. They're also on your handout, so you'll be able to find those. The next group that was mentioned as really needing attention in how we promote opportunities for equitable learning are children who are dual language learners. I want to make sure that we all understand that there are multiple components of how we equitably support these children. That one of the things we need to absolutely know is the assets of children being bilingual and maintaining and growing in their home language. We need to understand the phases of second language acquisition. Typically, those are organized in a way that I'll tell you about in a minute. And we also need to know on a daily basis, and you've seen some great examples of this today, how to support those learners in the classroom. So just, years ago, if we had been asked to take this true-false quiz, one of the things that I can tell you is we would have said true, true, and true. We now know that the answer to each of these questions is false, false, and false. And we know that the more we can build on the gifts children bring to us as part of their home language or home dialect, the more we can support, reinforce, and appreciate those gifts, the more successful that learner is likely to be. The research confirms that children who are exposed to 2 languages early in life develop 2 separate but interrelated systems, that even when children have disabilities, that promoting learning and development in both languages is tremendously important and will not lead to additional delays. So what does that mean we can access as resources to support equitable opportunities for children who are dual language learners in those 3 topics that I mentioned? One, there's a fabulous set of resources called The Importance of Home Language. These are beautifully formatted sheets that you can either share with staff, you can read yourself, you can give to students, and they look at and lay out in evidence-based ways the benefits of being bilingual. There's an article called The Gift of Language that you could pair with the gift video. That's one kind of resource. I think part of what we know, and one of the reasons this is so important, is that we now have some pretty solid research that says that children who come to preschool programs with home languages other than English enter with executive function and social emotional skills that are superior to some of the other children, to many of the other children. And that in fact, based on cultural factors, those are skills that are absolutely reinforced at home. What we often see though is because these are children who are learning in a different language than English, that in terms of what those learners look like when they enter kindergarten, they are often behind their peers in terms of the areas of language, literacy, and math. So what does that mean we need to do? Well, first of all, I think we need to understand what it feels like to be in a setting where no one speaks your language. Those of you who've traveled abroad, if you can, for just a brief moment of disquiet, resurrect the feeling of what it was like when you set foot into a place where no one spoke your language. Take a look.
ძალიან ხმაურია და საერთოდ არ შემიძლია. აი ნახე, კომბლე ხო დაჯდა, ძალიან ზარმაცი არის. და შენ გგონია? აბა რომელია კომბლე? მითხარი, ეს არის თუ?
Imagine that it is your first day of school, with new surroundings, new people, and a new language.
თუ გინდათ ცოტათი. ძალიან მიხარია რომ მოხვედით დღეს. ძალიან მადლობა. იმიტომ რომ აღარ გელოდით. ეხლა ჩვენ აი ამ წიგნს ვათვალიერებთ, ხო? საცოდავად შეჰკნავა, გაიგეთ? ესე იგი მე რომ მივდივარო, იქიდან წამოვედიო და მე ისე ვიქწავედი. მოდი, მოისეს, შენ მითხარი აბა, როგორ არის ჩვენი ძროხა? არ იცოდი მოისეს? ტრიშა, ხედავ მელია ძროხას. აბა მითხარი მელია ძროხა? ხო და ნახე, აი შეხედე შენს? ხო, არ ვიცი მე საიდან უნდა მოვიდეს ეს. არც ეხლა გჯერათ, რომ მე უძლეველი ვარ. ხომ ხედავთ? დენიელ, შენ იცი რა არის მელიაძრო, ხა? ესე იგი მელიაძრო ხარ, იცი რა არის დენიელ? მაშინ შენ მითხარი, აბა? შენ იცი დენრეი cut.
You know, I've had people say that when they watch this, their stomach starts to hurt, that they feel that increasing sense of tension. And I think, you know, thank you for this sense that you feel left out just listening. On page 5 of your handout, there is something called the Young Dual Language Learner 20 short videos. This is one of those videos. It's free and it's wonderful and the kind of thing that I think you might enjoy. I would like to know if anyone knows what language she was speaking. I'll be glad to tell you, but does anyone know? And if you do, please put that in the chat box. I'd like to see if anyone can guess or anyone knows. So what do we do instead? We create welcoming environments that really incorporate what a child brings, that incorporate the gifts, and that does so in authentic ways. And we collaborate with families to make sure that we can do that. Nope, not Albanian, not Arabic. Keep going. It's not Dutch. It's Georgian. Bet you didn't know that. So there you go. Evidence-based practices, just do everything that we can to make sure that the second language is supported. There is a phenomenal set of resources listed on your handout that's called, get this, specific strategies to support dual language learners when adults do not speak their language. Does anybody feel like this is a set of resources designed just for you? I know I do. I love having these to draw upon. They're fabulous. They're all formatted. They're wonderful, and they're all free and readily downloadable. Here's another example. So what we have to do is understand the sequence of second language acquisition. So I mentioned that set of 20 free videos. 4 of the videos chronicle the story of a little girl named Soyul who comes to her preschool program never having spoken a word of English. She's only ever spoken Korean at home. And what you get to see with skillful narration and supporting handouts are what the phases of typical second language acquisition look like, so that you're able to really understand that and support children who are going through the silent phase. Then, oops, I'm sorry, I thought there was one more slide, so please excuse me. I again want to make sure that you know there is also a set of free resources exclusively devoted to supporting dual language learners and their families that you can access to find more information. So with regard to inclusion, I am delighted that I can share with you some really interesting and important research. And that is that we have consistent research that shows that the benefits of quality inclusion accrue to both children with and without disabilities. For children with disabilities, we see those enhancements in every domain of development. For children who are their typically developing peers, most often we see those in the areas of social emotional development, that children are more empathetic, more collaborative, that these are life skills that then take them farther in their learning progression. Oops, sorry. We know that a variety of factors influence the acceptance and implementation of inclusion. The single greatest barrier to inclusion for years has remained constant. It's attitudes. So how is it that we can change how accepting we are of children with disabilities? One of the ways is by creating opportunities for higher education faculty and professional development providers to incorporate content on that topic. And that's exactly what the Hardin Scholars are engaged in right now. As a matter of fact, I get to talk to them later today. We also know that inclusion is not one person's job. Quality inclusion does not mean children with significant disabilities being dumped in the room of an early childhood educator. It means that we have talented individuals with many skills whose job it should be to collaborate and coordinate to make sure that the inclusion is of high quality. We also know that collaboration is a cornerstone of quality inclusion. If there is not time to collaborate, the likelihood of quality inclusion plummets. We just must figure out how to compensate teachers for the time they spend working with specialists, and specialists for the time they spend working with teachers. So I'd like to show you one last fact, that families generally view inclusion as a positive option, but some express concerns, and they express concerns because they're so worried that their children will be bullied, that their children will be picked on, that their children will be sitting by the side of the room while the other children participate. And it's our job to make sure that those concerns are not the reality. So part of what I did on your handout was to give you a number of resources. But before we go there, I'd like to show you an example of what quality inclusion can look like. Because something that we also know is that often early childhood educators do not feel well prepared to serve young children with disabilities. So I'd like to provide some of the pieces that I think can help. In particular, and actually, Debbie, thanks. I think the idea that teachers have the ability to manage and prevent bullying is a really great one. I'd like to share with you, I'm going to skip along to, I'd like to show you an example of what quality inclusion can look like. So you're going to see a little guy in a blue sweatshirt who's participating in a small group activity. This is a classroom in which there's both the teacher and an assistant. The assistant was with the other children. The other adult you'll see here is a graduate student from the local university here in North Carolina. Watch and see what's going on.
I think actually
Today, in Jacob's classroom, his teacher is reading a book that was specially made for him to fit his needs for speech articulation practice. But as you can see, she's reading this book that all the kids love with the entire group. In this way, all the children provide models for Jacob for the words that have been embedded in this little story that have his targets. So everybody says the words, everybody loves it, and Jacob, who's the little boy to the left of the screen with the blue shirt on, he gets some practice and he gets additional models, as well as the activity being a nice integrated part of his everyday classroom routines, because they have this circle time every day. You can see they're also using a mirror because they're talking a little bit about putting their lips together to make the bilabial M, B, and P sounds. Now,
thanks. And as Melody has commented, you know, just this is a perfect example of what we would call embedded instruction. Let's think about this for a minute. If Jacob were pulled out for articulation therapy, what would he be missing? And you heard that in the narrative. He'd be missing his friends, the social connection. He'd be missing the language modeling. And he would be missing participating in an activity that, and you heard that also, that all the children are interested in. What would his friends be missing? They'd be missing Jacob. But again, what we need to always remember about quality inclusion is it has to be good for both the child with, in this case, an IEP, specialized targets and goals, and the other children as well. That's what quality inclusion looks like. This is a video clip called Reading with Friends, and it's a free video that your tax dollars paid for. So take a look, it's on your handout. I'm going to show a couple other ideas for your consideration. Just before we go there, I'm going to torture you for a moment more. I'm going to ask you to think, did any of you have an older sibling who was an outstanding student? Or did you have an older sibling who was not an outstanding student? And how did that impact you as a learner? I literally have brought people to tears as they have strolled back down memory lane to think about what it was like to be the less adept learner who came behind a very talented sibling. I think one of the things that this reminds us of is that each of us is great at some things and perhaps less great at others. Do not ever ask me to tell you whether the building is north, south, east of west or here. Right or left I can do 100% of the time, but my ability to orient myself in space is very limited. Does that mean I'm geographically challenged? Perhaps, but I've compensated for it. And I think what I'd like to also suggest is that one of the strategies in moving toward equity for children with disabilities, for children who are dual language learners, for children who are diverse, is universal design for learning, which makes us really think about three different things. How many ways can you think of to represent a concept like an apple? A real apple, a plastic apple, a picture of an apple, the word apple. Do you hear how much difference there is among those ways to represent an object? Use that to support each learner, to make learning more concrete if that's helpful. How many ways do you know to engage a child in learning? Do you know what they like, what they dislike, what they want to learn? For that child who is not going to hold a marker to develop fine motor skills to save their life, try crazy gluing a dinosaur, their favorite thing in the world, to a clothespin and clothespinning, clamping the clothespin onto that marker, and see how much more the child's interests will spur the learning. And then finally, how many different ways do you know to have children show you what they know? Can they tell you it, but can they also sing it? Can they sign it? Can they draw it? These are all examples of resources that are readily available. There is an entire handout of resources on universal design for learning that is part of the set of resources on your website. I was going to give you some examples, but because of the time, I want to really flip ahead a little bit and tell you one other set of resources that is the last page of your handout are materials on that set of ideas for supporting children with or at risk for disabilities called recommended practices. And all of these tools are free and readily available. What you'll find, for example, if one of the things that you want to do is to build relationships between children with and without disabilities, that instead of just saying, I want to build relationships, one of the things that you could find is this set of practices that support child-to-child interaction. It's a checklist. You can use it to say, how can I support that? How can I break it down? How can I make it doable? As you look at that handout, that's the final page of your set, it will tell you about checklists that are available, about practice guides that are available. There are amazing resources for supporting young children with or at risk for disabilities. One final resource that I want to mention to you is an absolute favorite of anyone I show it to, and it's called An Advocate's Guide to Transforming Special Education, Creating Schools Where All Students Can Thrive. I want to just show you what the philosophical orientation of this document is. And it basically goes like this. Our philosophy is making sure that you're always thinking that a child is a general education student first. Here's your general education student who has some special needs, not here's a special education student. And this has been transformed into and sorted into practical solutions that apply to every child. And the bulk of this resource is organized in these sections. What is it that you can do to convey to a child the following? That you believe in them, that you want to include them, that you will always find them, that you will catch them when or before they fall, that you will meet them where they are and challenge them, that you will know them, that you will involve them in their family, and that you will stick with them. This fabulous resource, and again, I'm going to flip back just to make sure that I did not go through that too fast. This is posted on your website. It's called An Advocate's Guide to Transforming Special Education. So let me now move to the last section, and I'm speeding up a little bit because I have a here's another resource. I mentioned there are inclusive resources. I want to talk a tiny bit about family engagement, which we've also discussed a little bit. I cannot emphasize strongly enough that the more effectively we support families, the better their children do. This is also a slide in which, if you ever want evidence of the difference that effective family engagement makes, you will find that in the notes section of this slide. I think you should be aware that there is a federal definition. There's a beautiful document by the U.S. Departments of Health and Human Services and Education on family engagement. And part of what it says is that family engagement refers to the systematic inclusion of families in activities and programs that promote children's development, learning, and wellness, and that families participate in many ways, including evaluating us. This is a resource that defines family, as I had mentioned earlier, in ways that really reflect all of the caring adults who are in the life of a child. Now, the other finding that I wanted to be sure to share with you, I'm willing to bet that many of you will relate to this, is that I think we often, because we have our ideas about the right way or the best way to do things, make judgments about families. You know, it turns out, based on some research done by 0 to 3, that almost all parents feel judged almost all the time. This is not exclusive to families who have children with disabilities, or families who speak another language, or families who are different, that families feel judged by others. So what is it that we can do to effectively engage them so this is less of an issue? I think we need to listen to families and value diversity. I'm going to share an example of what that might mean in a minute. We need to build inclusive, safe learning communities. One of the things that will be the most basic building block of those communities is a shared language. If you look at this picture, part of what it conveys is that you can either refer to what's in the bowl as hard-boiled eggs or boneless chicken. Our language divides us more than it separates us, it divides us more than it unites us. And finally, I think today is an example of a value that you embrace by being here, that you are willing to continue to learn and grow. Kimberly's asking if this session is recorded. I believe so, I hope so that you can share it with others. So just as we run to the finish line, there are a couple things that I want to be sure that we come back to pay attention to. And once again, I want to come back to where we started, that as we think about all of these opportunities to enhance the quality of our work, that we always need to think about Maslow before Bloom, that we must think about how families are doing. Robin McWilliam has 3 questions that to me are essential in framing how we interact with families. What would it be like if, before we started in on the next lesson, we made time to visit with families or ourselves to say, do you have enough time for yourself or yourself and another person? When you lie awake at night worrying, what do you worry about? And if there's anything you could change in your life, what would it be? That's where we can start to understand what's really important to families and to build from that. In closing, what I'd like to do is to really suggest that we need to reframe the way that we think about differences. And I think we have a responsibility to do this for ourselves and to do this for children. Often when people think about differences, it's in a very negative context or a stark context. If you think about the look, this is someone different than me, so I consider them in a different way. And I think one of our huge responsibilities, or I would say opportunities, in early childhood is to really create a context in which children learn to value, to be excited about, to be welcoming of differences. differences of many, many kinds. To cement that point, I'd like to show you a video. This is also a video that you have access to, but I'd like to show you one more video and see what you think.
What makes you two different from each other?
I used to not like letters, but now I like letters. I do not like letters at all. Lucy loves tomato sauce, and I do like it, but I don't love it as much as Lucy. Don't have the same. Our office is down the hill, and I live up the hill. No, I have smaller toes than Artie. Addie, I like goose and chips, and I like sushi. And they're different. She never stops talking. We got different hair. He, Lucian doesn't have squirrels in the roof. We have squirrels in the roof, so we can't watch television that much because it's biting all the wires. Both. I'm good at gymnastics and Kayla May is good at swimming. I'm not good at dancing. I am. You're defender and I'm defender. No, I'm not anymore. I used to be, no, I'm not. No, we're not. What? Good at counting and I'm good at hiding. And Matthew's good at... better at Tig. And Matthew's good at staying in den.
When it comes to difference, children see things differently.
Do you have anything else to say? No.
CBeebies, everyone's welcome.
So the appeal that I'd like to make is that we really work to help children develop the vocabulary. When they see something that's different, to say, isn't that interesting? Isn't that different? That's new. Before they learn harsh and unkind words to describe differences, that we build that repertoire. Quite frankly, it's a basic component of cognition, because noticing tiny differences is something children must do in order to learn to read. Think about how different a P is from a B, and it's just spatial orientation. But if children don't notice that difference, they will struggle to read. So with that, I'm going to actually, believe it or not, stop sharing my slides, because I'd like to just have the opportunity to see you, to thank you, to appreciate you, and to encourage you to use the resources to share with others, to use the resources to reflect on what you already do that's outstanding, to use the resources to learn and grow, and to make a commitment to support each and every child and family. And I think the last thing that I'm supposed to ask you to do is to complete a survey that will provide feedback on this presentation. And I hope you will all do that, because I'm eager to hear what you think. If you have any thoughts to offer in the chat box, I would be delighted to see those. With just a couple minutes left, I'm going to stop now and say thank you so very much for joining me today. It has been a delight to be with you. I hope that next time it can be in person. Thanks so much, everybody.
Yeah, this is Melody Musgrove. I just want to thank you so much for an inspiring presentation. I'm so glad that my computer has a mute button on it, because I've been sitting here just cheering and reminiscing of how much I miss working with you, and just the amazing person that you are and the great work that you do. And so thank you for inspiring us today to make a world that is more inclusive and more supportive of all families and of all children. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Camille. We certainly appreciate it. That was a lot of great information, a lot of great resources. Everybody, I put the survey that she was talking about in the chat box several times. I just did it again. Please make sure that you go in and fill that out for us so that we can know how great all of this information was for you. We do appreciate you, Camille.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks,
everybody.
Thank you.
A real person. Hi, Heather.
Look, hold on.
Oh my gosh, 2 people.
I'm here too.
Oh, yay. God, it's just so nice to see.
I had to go in and out because I had students coming in to do testing on our virtual day. So, but I was.
Well, hopefully the resources are things that you're interested in.
Yeah, I already emailed out the sheet to all the staff. So I'm just waiting for I was putting in the thing. I said, I'm waiting for the recording so I could